Howdy, this is Mr. Justice, and I'm going to go over how you can complete part one of our lab surveying the biodiversity of Pantry Food Park. Once you've made your copy of your handout, I want you to put your name at the top. In fact, wherever there's yellow with those hashtag symbols is where you will be typing within this handout. A severe drought has impacted the community of organisms that live in Pantry Food Park. This disturbance has decreased the producers in the area, which has had a direct and indirect effect on all other members of the community. Some areas in the park are being affected more than others. As an ecologist, you are interested in surveying the biodiversity of Pantry Food Park so that you and your team can protect the surviving species living in the park and to monitor the park's health and recovery. So the research question that will guide us through both parts 1 and part 2 of this lab is the following. Which area within Pantry Food Park has the most biodiversity? Plastic cutting board valley, wooden cutting board forest, or plate dry lake bed? So in a moment, I'll show you the photos that we're talking about here of these different areas within the park, but you're going to make a prediction here, right? Which area of the park do you think has the most species biodiversity? So you're going to tell me one of the 3 areas of the park, and then just give me a quick explanation as to why. So take a look. What are we doing here? I'm going to go through these procedures in a moment. Let me just show you one of the pictures. So this is an area within our park called Plastic Cutting Board Valley. And within this valley here, you can see, well, there's black beans, there's pinto beans, there's popcorn, there's Cheerios, and there's noodles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hey, the species richness of Plastic Cutting Board Valley is 5. So if you scroll down a little bit more, you see that you have a data table here with all the yellow areas and the hashtags. So for each of the areas, you're going to calculate species richness. We just did that for the first area. It's 5, so I'll type 5 in there. All right, so let's go back to the procedures so you kind of get an idea as to the photos in the data table, all right? Now we'll go through the instructions. All right, so determine the species richness, which is the number of different species found in the photo. For example, if there's a community of Cheerios, pinto beans, noodles, and black beans in an area, the species richness would be 4. Why? Because there are 4 different species. That's what species richness tells us. What's the next part? Count the local abundance of each species. Record this data in the table. Next one, calculate the relative abundance or the proportion of each species relative to one another. Record your calculations to the nearest thousandth in the tables. I'll show you how to do this in a moment when we go back down to that picture in the data table, but if you need help calculating the proportions, you can take a look at this little paragraph here because it's there for you. Then finally, what's the whole point of this? Remember, this is part 1. In part 1, what we're doing is calculating proportions of species within 3 different areas so that we can use those proportions, those numbers, those values, to calculate something called the Shannon Diversity Index value. What? Don't worry about that. We're going to get more into it in part 2, I promise. So let's go through the procedures. Pretty straightforward, right? Hey, count up the total number of individuals within this specific area in the park. I believe there are 107 total within Plastic Cutting Board Valley, but guys, you're going to want to do this on your own. Count them up individually, right? Better way to do this is to count the individual species, right? And then add up all of those individual species. So for example, take a look here. Let's count up the Cheerios. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 Cheerios. So I'm going to put 8 as my abundance. How do we calculate proportion? Proportion is going to be the species, over the total abundance of all species within these areas. So for this one, it would be 8 over 107. Let's just write it in. 8 divided by 107. So what we'll do is we've pulled up a scientific calculator here. We'll type in 8, divide sign 107, which is going to give us a pretty long number here. How about we go to the nearest 10,000th? So we'll go to 0.074. Well, I got to look at the number next to it, 6. So that'll round up to 748. All right, so let's come back over here to our lab. And we'll say, all right, the proportion of 8 over 107 is 0.0748. All right, you're going to want to do this for each of the following and remaining species in each of the areas. Okay, so you're going to have a proportion number. You don't have to turn that into a percentage. Just leave it as a decimal number. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, we're going to pick it up for part 2 when we return.